Thank you very much for the invitation, and to the organizers. It's a great pleasure to be back in Athens. I attended the eHealth conference that you had under your presidency of the European Council. And I must say that progress has been made. Just listening to this presentation show that you are actually reaping the benefits of the investments in eHealth and big data. So first, Professor Kyriakos, you mentioned in your introduction the big numbers, 10 to the 17th and 10 to the 18th. We probably all know the story behind the name of Google. A Google is 10 to the 100. So I think we still have a way to go before we really touch big data big time. As at least Google is prepared for 10 to the 100. And I assume they have built some servers somewhere in the world that can manage all this data for big data analytics. So for me, working in the research-based pharmaceutical industry, it's really interesting to see how all the different parts of my companies are coming together in one room, which I call real-world evidence or big data. So we tend to think about drug development, medicines development as some kind of time axis. Okay? So you have early discovery, and then you have development, clinical trials, and you get the regulatory approval, and then you introduce something in the marketplace, you do pharmacovigilance, and you will add some new indication, and that's your life cycle. Okay? So you could say that there are people that are working on the left-hand side on development and research, and then you have people that are working in the health systems. Now, both these people, these two groups of people are both realizing that they need to have access to data, but for completely different reasons. And this is what I'm going to talk about a little bit, without slides, as you noticed, is how the researchers are desperately seeking population data to make sense of all the omics, of all the genomics, of all the connectome mapping, the microbiome, all of it. And at the same time, people that actually work in what we call market access, people that work on health technology assessment, pricing, reimbursement, they desperately need data to prove the case of the value of the new medicines. So it's very interesting how the same data sets are now desirable from very different people. And I see this all the time, that people come to meetings, internal meetings and external meetings, and it's like two worlds that meet one another. You've got the people in white coat, not wearing white coat, but literally speaking, and then you have the other people out in health systems. So let me discuss this with you a little bit. So first of all, I think we have to be careful with this terminology, big data, because it's a kind of a buzzword, okay? There are a bit of this which is truly big data, where you actually, in my words, you collect all the information you can get hold of, because you never know what you're going to use it for. And we have examples here of how you can look at what time in the morning the patients show up. You can do network analysis for management purposes. You collect that information and you figure out afterwards if you actually be used for other things, than you had originally intended. That is for me big data. And we just started that. Imagine the day when we're going to have wearables, all of us. I mean, you have these watches and you have socks that will measure blood pressure and glucose and everything. And you start collecting all of this all the time. And you upload that. That's big data. In fact, to tell you an anecdote, we had a workshop in Brussels on clinical trials, and you are all for the sectors, you know what a clinical trial is, and we think they're all very big and complicated. And there was a representative of Facebook who said, I don't understand why you in the pharmaceutical companies collect so little data. I said, what do you mean? It's like always, no, I said, you should collect everything, what people have for breakfast in the morning, what TV show did they watch, what books did they read, how did they get to work? Maybe it's a slight exaggeration, but I make a point here that big data is really big data. Okay? The most immediate application, though, for us as research-based companies is to look at real-world evidence, which is not necessarily big data. It's just that we get hold of, let's say, health record information. So all the information that EOPI sits on may not be big data in that sense, extreme sense, but it's real-world evidence. It's some kind of structured information. As opposed to a clinical trial, it's collected in the real world. And if we can get hold of that, we can do so much more with it. So having said that, we are making as an industry enormous investments in this space of real-world evidence and big data. You probably know the statistics that my member companies spend 120 billion euros every year on research and development. About 40 billion of that is clinical research. And similarly, if you take the whole number, it's about the same size, which is actually being spent in Europe on clinical research, about 35 billion euros on clinical research. Now, I hear from my companies, and I don't have any exact numbers, that we're spending between 5 and 10 billion every year on real-world evidence and big data. Okay? And this is just the beginning. Okay? The big challenge we have, and I'll come back to this at the end, is to get access to information. And there are a number of hurdles, technical hurdles, integrity hurdles, trust hurdles, okay, which we have to overcome. So these investments are also happening increasingly together with one another, in collaboration. I remember last time I was here, I was talking about every time I'm here, I'm talking about our big public-private partnership between the pharmaceutical industry in Europe and the European Commission. We have under this big EU budget, the parent initiative is part of the EU program, was part of the 7th framework program. Now we have a big program called IMI, Innovative Medicines Initiative, which has a total budget of 5.4 billion euros, of which we've allocated about half of it. And in this program, we now have a new initiative called Big Data for Better Outcomes. And this is our flagship initiative going forward, where all my companies are coming along and they're investing their resources, which is usually what we call in kind, so it's time and effort from companies. There's money from the European Commission. The money doesn't go to my members, no, unfortunately not. Or fortunately not, I should say. It's going to academics, institutions, consultants, and small companies. And we have an initial budget of 200 million euros for this, but there's more money to get if we need to invest more. And here we're going to deliver on some of the things we've been talking about. So we have two types of projects in mind. One is true big data. So we're discussing now with a number of countries in Europe, and I would like to consider Greece on that list as well, just based on what I heard this evening. So we're looking for populations, whether it's a region or a country, where we can get hold of everything, including population genomics, whole genome sequencing, or whole exome sequencing, and proteomics, epigenetics in a population. Where we can get hold of that, that's going to be so competitive in the world, because this is where the research is going to go. Where can we get hold of this massive amount of information? So we're having preliminary discussions with all these, we're having discussions with a number of countries and regions. And interestingly, funnily, it's probably going to be easier in places that have made investments more lately in eHealth and informatics. So it's actually places like Hungary, like Malta, maybe Greece, because my home country, Sweden, is stuck in some kind of old mainframe IT infrastructure with incompatibilities between northern Stockholm and southern Stockholm, where I lived for many years. Okay? So there's actually high hopes for the newcomers, if you wish, if you don't mind me saying so, in the space of eHealth and big data. So we're going to look for investments in this program for true big data investments. And the other part we're going to do, which is more hands-on, is that we're going to take a look at things that are coming in the pipeline and where we can set things up for better outcomes. So I'll give you an example. The best example we have right now is in Alzheimer's. We all know, you all know that we have a few Alzheimer medicines. They're not particularly effective. No offense to my member companies that sell these medicines, but they're not so effective. We need new technologies for Alzheimer's. And it's not just about medicines, it's actually about a combination. So when we deliver on this, and we is not just pharma, it's going to be devices and everything. When we deliver on something really effective against dementia, Alzheimer's, it's going to be a combination of things. There's going to be some new imaging diagnostics to identify patients, to intercept them early. It's going to be some kind of medicine. It's going to be some kind of app. It's going to be some things that monitor us and coaches us. Okay, so that's the package that will come. And imagine if that will come 3 years from now. And there will be a headline saying, cure for Alzheimer's. Are we ready? Are health systems ready? No. The regulators are ready. So eHealth with EMA, they've given us advice on the clinical trials. But the health systems will wake up and say, what's this? Wow, how are we going to pay for this? And that's not the first, that may be the first question, how are we going to pay for this? But then the second question is, okay, well, what's really worth paying for? What are the outcomes? Yeah, clinical trial is interesting, but what is the short-term outcome? What's the long-term outcome? So we have now, and I'm very proud of my member companies, this is not my idea, the companies that do Alzheimer's research came together and said, okay, we better prepare for this. We are competing on research, but let's prepare. Let's talk to the health systems in Europe, involve patients, physicians, health systems, payers, and have a conversation already now. What constitutes a good outcome, short-term and long-term? And once you've done that, and that might take some time, then you have to think about how do we build infrastructure for this? You know, this imaging stuff, diagnostics, budgeting, and which is the vision from many of my CEOs, the people I work for. The vision is to be paid for outcomes. This is sounds like a dream that we're not being paid for tablets, but paid for results. It's going to take a very long time. It's going to take a very long time to get there, but it's very important to have a goal. And this is the goal that's now expressed on most of my member companies. Some are a bit more cautious, others are more ambitious, but it's very clear that we have to go in the direction of the focus of the outcomes, the real results in healthcare. And by doing that, we also somehow move from some kind of theoretical model of randomized control trials and health technology assessment and qualities. And it all looks theoretical that you give this intervention and you will save on hospitalization, or you will work longer, and you don't need a pension earlier, and so on. But if you somehow can say, okay, we're going to get paid when you see that result, then many skeptics, ministries of finance and many health systems people that are skeptical of the data we come with, they say, well, okay then, maybe let's do that. But to round up, that requires data. And reliable data. So the countries in the world, and in fact some European countries are much ahead of even the United States, where there's a lot going on. So Italy is a leader when it comes to what we call managed entry agreements. And they have these 50, or close to 100 now, I think, managed entry agreements, and they track performance, but the data is not good enough to actually start paying for results. So we, as a research-based industry, are really keen to partner with governments and stakeholders to make sure that we can get hold of this information. And again, we need triple firewalls between us and the patients. Okay? But this is not about tracking patients or physicians prescribing or pharmacists dispensing. No. We need to have absolute safeguards. But we need this data not only to advance science. We also need this data to sort of move towards the next model, which is to really reward us for delivering on results and not just for selling a tablet. Okay? And the hurdles we have are, as I mentioned, technical. But now we see many places, such as in Greece, you may have the data. It sounds as though, just based on these presentations again, it sounds as though you're sitting on a lot of information. Okay? But I also heard from my friend Pascal here that it's been very difficult to get hold of that data to make this great presentation today, you know. So we need to have access to this information, both for academic research and for research and access knowledge in the pharmaceutical industry. And then there's a question of trust, of course. And that's why I think it's very important for us in the pharma industry, including my colleagues, friends in the audience, to be very, very open with our intentions. Okay? So the intentions is not to improve some sales and marketing model by being even more sophisticated. No, it's actually about moving to a new era where we focus on outcomes and results for patients. So big data, real world evidence is key for this transformation. Thank you again for the invitation.